Hello and welcome to part 7 of our video series on building a Node, Express and Postgres based API. Today we're going to be working through setting up our Postgres database, and for that we're going to be making use of a couple of technologies. One of them is Docker, and the other is Docker Compose, which is kind of an extension to Docker to allow you to write your infrastructure that we're going to need to set up in nice kind of contained files. Now, for those of you who haven't used Docker before, Docker essentially allows you to run programs or applications within a container, which is essentially an isolated piece within your computer. So this means that when we're starting up our Postgres database, we don't need to install Postgres on your local machine and clutter up your local machine. What you can do is actually just run it in a container which will have the exact environment that it needs set up to run. Now, the instructions on installing and setting up Docker change fairly regularly, so I think the best thing to do is I'll leave a link in the video description for the instructions that Docker provide themselves, so you can go ahead and have a look through how you need to install Docker and Docker Compose. There's very in-depth instructions on Mac OS, Windows and Linux as well for installing that, so go ahead and check out the instructions they give you there, because those will be really comprehensive. Once you're done, you should have a access to now be able to run the Docker Compose command, Docker Compose within a terminal, and then you'll see a whole bunch of different things that you can do with it. But for what we're going to be doing, most of the work that we're actually going to be doing is going to be based in our code here. So what we'll do first of all, when we're working with Docker Compose, we use what's known as a Docker Compose file, and that's a YAML file. So let's just add a Docker Compose.yaml to the root of our directory. What we're going to do first of all is outline the version of Docker Compose that we want to be using, which is going to be 3. So we'll put that in there, and then what happens next is we need to define a set of services that we want Docker to create on our behalf. So what we do here is we'll just write services, and be very careful about the indenting here. It's just a single tab to indent. YAML is very pernickety when it comes to indenting, so make sure to indent as you're going along. So we're going to declare a service. It's going to be called Postgres. It's going to use an image of Postgres latest. So that's going to be the latest image of Postgres. We're just going to give it an option of restart always. We're going to give it a couple of environment variables. Now, the environment variables here are what Postgres is going to use to give us access to the database. So the first environment variable that we're going to give it is Postgres_user, and that what we're going to do is we'll just keep it simple and Postgres, and what we'll also want is Postgres, and then we're going to want password equals Postgres. Next. Now this hasn't always been necessary, but I always tend to include our port definition here anyway, but we'll just do a port definition 5432 through to 5432. So what this will do is expose the port within the Docker container to our local machine so that we can access it. And port 5432, for those of you unfamiliar with Postgres, is the default port that you can access the database on. And now what we're going to do is we're also going to add a volume onto here. And now what this is going to do is allow us to persist our data onto our local machine, so that when Docker starts up or shuts down, it'll either create the machine or tear down the machine, but the data that was stored locally on that machine will be gone forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a volume that says I want anything that's stored on the Docker Compose created service to actually be mirrored onto our machine. And what this means is that when you scale down your service or scale it up locally, you're not going to lose all the data in your database. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say we're going to have a Postgres data folder locally, and we want that to be mapped to var lib postgresql data. So that'll bind everything in here, which is where Postgres stores its data, into a local folder, which will be created on here for us when this service stands up. Now, once this is all done, what you can do is from the root of your project. So if you just do an ls, you'll be able to see that we've got our Docker Compose YAML file here. So what we can do Docker Compose up-d, and what this does is it stands the containers up, and then this -d says stand them up in detached mode, so it's not going to block our terminal here with them running, and that's what you're going to want for when you want your services to be running indefinitely in the background. And what we'll do, we'll start that up. If you're doing this for the first time, there'll be a little bit of work that goes on in the background here that will pull down the latest Postgres image for you and create the container. But once that's done, you should get this nice little done here. Now what I would recommend doing is you're going to want to just check and make sure that everything is running as you're expecting it to. And what you'll have is if you do Docker Compose and then PS, it'll show you the status of all of the containers. And what you're looking for is a state of up. If it's anything but working, then you'll have like an exit code that you'll be able to go ahead and Google and figure out. But if this is just a fresh install, you shouldn't have any issues, and it should just come up as you'd expect it to. Now, obviously this doesn't start Postgres up for us within our application or create a connection to it or anything like that at the moment, and we'll cover that off in the next video where we'll create something that starts up a database connection for us when we get started. But what I tend to find is quite useful is to use a database tool to be able to go and inspect what's going on within your databases. I tend to use a program called dbeaver, which is cross-platform, so whether you're on Mac, Linux or Windows, you should be able to get it without any issues. And what I do then is you can just follow along and create a new connection. Create a new connection, Postgres connection. It's got Postgres already filled in here, localhost 5432, database. The default database name for anything created with Postgres is just Postgres, and we'll just fill in our Postgres password that we added in there, which is in our environment variable, and we'll click finish, and then you can double click, and once you get onto here, this is essentially you connecting into your database, and you can see that it's up and running now for you. Now a useful command for once you've finished with what you're doing, if you want to shut this service down because you've got other things that you want to be doing, you can just simply go ahead and do Docker Compose down, and that will shut the services down, and then obviously you can just disconnect from the database here as well, and you'll be all fully disconnected. And what you can do, just to double check, you can try connecting again. Connections refused because it's no longer live, and then if we start it back up again, we can connect onto the database okay. So like I said, in the next video what we'll go ahead and do is we'll start a database connection when our application starts up, so that we can go ahead and access all of the functionality that comes with a database. I'll leave a link in the video description to dbeaver as well, so you can go and check that out. If you run into any issues with Docker or have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment in the video description or in the video, and I'll do my best to help. But other than that, I will see you on the next video.